Hello, I'm Dr. Jeff Kingsley, and welcome to another edition of Riding in Cars with Researchers. Today we're going to talk about virtuous and vicious cycles. Virtuous and vicious cycles. And what I'm going to explain to you is that I believe that sites and principal investigators are currently embroiled in a vicious cycle that is preventing the ability or hampering the ability for sites to substantially get better. And I'll explain that. So what are virtuous and vicious cycles? They are chains of events, many times very complex, chains of events that are like dominoes. That one thing is contributing to another thing is contributing to a third and a fourth, and they are self-reinforcing, heading in a certain direction. And they'll continue in that direction, that spiral, until an external force breaks the cycle and allows the cycle, the chain of events, to change. And these cycles are everywhere. They're in our bodies, they're in our own biochemistry, self-reinforcing cycles in a direction. They're in economics. They're in how cities attempt to change neighborhoods from being in dire poverty to entering the middle class. And they're in the research world. They're even in our own family dynamics, how we raise our kids and how we run our families. But I'm specifically going to talk about the research world, and I'm going to talk about the fact that I believe we are in a vicious cycle when it comes to sites and principal investigators, and what I think we need to do about that. So what's the proof? Why should you believe me that I think sites are in a vicious cycle? How would we know if sites are in a vicious cycle? Well, if over time site performance is getting worse, certainly not getting better, then obviously there's a cycle that's creating that, that's reinforcing that. As opposed to a cycle where site performance continually gets better and better and better year after year after year. So what do we know? Well, we know that 51% of physicians that try and do research fail. That 51% churn rate, the one and dones. They try and do their first trial and then they quit and never go back because it was too hard. The regulatory burden was too hard. They couldn't pick the right trials. They couldn't enroll patients into the trials. They couldn't make money doing the trials. They couldn't even break even. Well, what else do we know? Well, we know that most sites underperform. We know that site quality is not what I believe it should be. We know that timelines are not adhered to. Most research trials take 198% longer to enroll than was predicted. We know that that's costing the industry billions of dollars. We know that time to database lock is extended. Time to first patient enrolled is extended. So sites are underperforming on enrollment, quality, timelines, and customer service. We know that the number of inclusion and exclusion criteria is increasing, not decreasing, not staying the same. There are good and bad things to the fact that IE criteria are increasing. The good things, IE criteria are increasing because we're getting smarter. We're starting to put genetic and biomarker criteria into inclusion and exclusion. So for example, you enter a trial, but if you don't have the right gene, you can't proceed in the trial. That's a great thing actually, because we're starting to get to precision medicine and precision research and tailoring a research trial to you and your actual genes. That's a good thing. Biomarkers. We're getting smarter about figuring out who should be able to proceed in a trial based upon very specific things that we determine in that person's bloodstream or in a biopsy, for example. Those are good reasons to have inclusion and exclusion criteria becoming more complicated. Bad reasons, we're really good at adding IE, inclusion and exclusion. We're very bad about removing IE that are no longer relevant. FDA has published on this, and it's an issue because increasingly the patients who are allowed to enter a research trial are looking less and less like real-world patients, your average patient. And that's an issue. That's an ethical issue. It's a scientific issue. We have to start loosening up the criteria so that our research patients look more like the general population. That's an imperative. And in fact, Scott Gottlieb, the FDA commissioner, just published on that last week. One of the guidance that came out recently was about loosening the IE criteria in oncology trials around prior cancers. We have an issue with we're getting older as a population, but we're not letting older adults into research trials. All sorts of things like that. We've got to loosen those IE criteria. Number of procedures per patient per visit is going up. That's reducing sites' ability to be able to be successful. They're looking for a rarer patient, and when they find that rare patient, you're asking so much of the patient, there's a greater likelihood that the patient goes, I've got young kids, I can't possibly be at the office that long to do all of these procedures, or I'd have to take too much time off of work. Now, what's the proof that I know that that has an effect? Tufts University has published on the success of enrollment over the course of time. Rough numbers, approximately 10 years ago, the average research site enrolled approximately 8 patients per research trial. Average research site enrolled approximately 8 patients per research trial. Today, the average research site is enrolling approximately 2.8 patients per research trial. And the industry is simply opening up more sites per trial so that they still get their patients enrolled. But it's becoming far harder. You come up on trials and you're putting fewer patients into each trial. So to even remain revenue neutral, you have to do twice as many trials. The trials are getting harder, you're asking more of patients, so therefore you're putting fewer patients in every trial. Now you have to maintain a larger trial volume to even remain revenue neutral. Well, larger trial volume means now you've increased the regulatory burden. Again, one of the reasons why physicians drop out, the churn rate. You've got three times as many IRBs, 3 times as many research protocols, 3 times as many portals, 3 times as many usernames and passwords, 3 times as many CRAs to deal with, 3 times as many project managers, and on it goes. This is a self-reinforcing, vicious cycle. All of these things are contributing to one another and increasing the burden on sites, reducing the ability for sites to be successful with research, and therefore reducing site performance, and therefore meaning that the industry has to open up even more sites to be successful, and therefore each site that's opened up puts fewer patients in, and. That's what a vicious cycle is. Now, my call to action, we have to break it, right? I mentioned that the only way to break out of a vicious cycle is for an external force to come in and shake things up, to break the cycle so that you can then convert to a virtuous cycle or to at least maintain status quo, but not to get worse. And we're getting worse right now. As the data shows us over the last 10 years, we are getting worse. So what do we have to do? Well, 1, recognize we're in a vicious cycle. 2, start tackling the dominoes of this vicious cycle. The 51% churn rate of physicians. Right now, we're putting a Band-Aid on it. The Band-Aid is we convince more doctors to say, yes, sure, I'll give it a shot, but we're maintaining this horrible churn rate, which means half of all the docs who are doing research have less than 1 research trial under their belts. That's not acceptable. We have to tackle that, and not by putting a Band-Aid on, but tackling the root sources of the issue, reducing the regulatory burden, helping physicians be set up for success so that they can choose the right trials, so that they can be successful with putting patients into trials. We need to reduce the IE criteria rapidly, and Scott Gottlieb, in fact, just published on that as well. His criticism of the industry that we are not adapting fast enough to simplifying research, to changing what we're doing. We have to simplify the IE criteria. We have to reduce the number of primary and secondary endpoints. All of that will make research trials simpler, which will increase the number of enrollments per trial per site, which improves the economics of running research, both for the industry as well as for those physicians. We need to tackle all of the things that are contributing to the vicious cycle. And in doing so, we will help break out of the vicious cycle. We need to start compensating physicians for their investment in being better, for their investment in being the best of the best. We need to start paying for performance. Sites that can perform exceptionally well on EQTCS should be paid very differently from sites that can't. All of these things will help us break out of the vicious cycle and start changing how sites are chosen, how sites are compensated, which enters us into a virtuous cycle where the best of the best now are able to be even better, and the laggards, the ones who weren't able to be the best of the best, are now incentivized to move into the category of the best of the best. Virtuous cycle. Okay, let's keep the conversation going. Vicious versus virtuous cycles. As always, thank you for riding along. I greatly appreciate it. Continue to contact me. I love the feedback. Follow us on all the social media channels. Seriously, follow us on all the social media channels. It helps us. YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and as always, ride along with me again in the future. Take care.